Hey, welcome back to this new edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook on March the 11th. Arpin Basu, how are you?
Good. I think I'm kind of recovered. I'm kind of recovered from what was a crazy week.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, yeah. It's 8 days on the road. You come home on deadline day, leaves Habs the next day. So yeah, it's been a bit of a week, but Canadians come out of it. Obviously we addressed the trade deadline in the Friday episode, but we want to kind of look at sort of the aftermath of the trade deadline a bit deeper today. They come out of the trade deadline not having, obviously having moved Jake Allen. We talked about that a fair bit. They're not appreciably worse as a team today than they were on Thursday.
No, because you have, it's just you go down to two goalies. And I'm interested to see, though, how they're going to occupy the 23rd spot on the roster and if they ever will. But, I mean, you're right. Having not subtracted any other skater, they're the same team. And I mean, the only difference is you enter the locker room now and Caden Primo has moved away from being at the far end of the room, close in Brossard, close to the exit, basically, and has moved to Jake Allen's spot. He's lifted that in the past,
which he did in the Bell Center as well.
Yeah, he's done that in the past, but it always implicit that it was a temporary move, and it was just because he could maneuver a little bit. We were both in Carolina the other day, and he had a little folding chair planted in the middle of the tiny visitors' room in Raleigh, and so that was really a symbol when you look at the way that he was set up in Carolina versus how he is now, both in Brossard and in Montreal. It's a good glimpse of how his status has been elevated. And for now, it's not temporary. That's the new reality for him. So, no, I mean, considering the fact that, since that day that he was shelled against Florida, he's played very well. He's been probably a superior goalie to Jake Allen for the time being. It's been addition by subtraction to a certain extent, because otherwise the team's the same.
Yeah, on the ice. I mean, obviously, the off-ice element of Jake Allen, we're not gonna just discount and write off. But yeah, on the ice, it is addition by subtraction in the sense that the Canadians have another roster spot to play with, although frankly, they probably, and we'll get to this, they probably feel they have too many of Laval's players in Montreal already. They're not going to start adding more of them. But yeah, the goaltending situation moving forward, the fact that they are the same team, they're facing a similarly difficult schedule. Martin St. Louis keeps bringing it up, brought it up again today. According to Dom Lucian's model at The Athletic, the Canadians have the second hardest remaining schedule in the NHL. The projected points of their opponents are collectively 97. Washington is the only team with a more difficult schedule with 98. But half of them are at home. And, it's an interesting test for this group. And I really think what happened Saturday night is kind of like the perfect result, the perfect scenario where the Canadians play an excellent game. I think Martin St. Louis mentioned today that they only gave up 11 scoring chances against the Leafs, which is one of their better defensive games of the year.
Yeah.
Really controlled long stretches of that game in terms of offensive zone time, puck possession, all those things, generating chances, and lost the game in regulation. So everyone's happy in the end, because it's like,
because that's competitive losing.
That's competitive losing. We're back to that, and so it's, it's. I don't know how much higher up the draft lottery rankings the Canadians are going to be able to get, but they will. They are facing a very difficult road. We've mentioned it already. We don't need to go blow by blow, but like you take out the Tuesday game against Columbus, and then it's a steady stream of pretty heavy hitters on the schedule. And so, it's, but in your eyes, like what I found interesting, I found something interesting over that road trip is Martin St. Louis talking about the power play. I mentioned it in my notebook this morning, but how that was he was bringing that up as something that's going to exist, that
Yeah.
they have established something that they can carry over into next year. The irony of it is that when he was saying that, the power play was actually in a very terrible run of results. But the eye test with the power play is goes beyond the numbers, because even the underlying numbers for the power play over the last 10 odd games have not been very good. But you look at it and you look at some of the interesting creative ways they're doing it, um, moving guys around. Cole Caulfield winding up net front sometimes, Nick Suzuki playing the bumper sometimes, like just playing around with things and being unpredictable and creative and imaginative, um, is, I think, a, a base or a model that they can bring over to next season, when there's probably going to be different personnel. Obviously, Kirby Doc will get integrated in some way. They can maybe balance out their two units a little bit with somewhat of an infusion of talent, and go at it that way instead. But what else down the stretch here do you think the Canadians will be able to carry over? Like, I think the first line, obviously, this season is something that we all looked at as something that they can carry over to next season. What else is there, in your opinion?
Well, one thing that I'm going to look at closely is, can Arbor Jackeye continue? He's been developing steadily. He's been very effective, or increasingly getting better since he was called up from Laval. And I think that
Mhm.
this is something that I want to see towards the last 18 games of the year. People look for reasons or goals that the Canadians can have for themselves for the rest of the season. That's one. In my mind, Jack Eye is going to be, I think, an important contributor on this team for many years. So you want to see an improvement on that side. Uh, I've seen also, I mean, Alex Newhook has started to put some points on the board also lately. He seems to be finally getting into the beat after missing so many weeks of activity. So that's another
Mhm.
guy. We discussed in the past how it's really the guys that are part of the core, the guys that are going to be there, let's say in 2, 3, 4 years, that are the ones that are worth focusing on the most. So those are two. Those are two of those guys. But before thinking that the rest of the season is a waste, that they have nothing to play for, etc., this is a notion that the guys in the room really push back on.
Mhm.
They really think that they have plenty to play for. I was chatting with Jonathan Kovacevic a few days ago, and he was saying we owe it to each other to play with a lot of intensity. And Martin St. Louis has been talking to his players about the fact that he compared the rest of the year to climbing a mountain. And
Mhm.
basically, it's just the idea is you just take steps towards the top of that mountain. They won't reach it this year. They won't reach it next year. And it depends. You can argue, what is the top of the mountain? Is it winning a Stanley Cup? Is it just becoming the best version of themselves? Who knows? But no matter how you take that figure of speech, let's say that it's just becoming a highly competitive team. Uh, it's just they need to take those steps and climbing the mountain. And
Mhm.
when you climb a mountain, sometimes you reach little flats where you catch your air, you adjust, you found an equilibrium also, and where there's rarefied air, you pitch your tent and all that, and then you continue the day after once you've stabilized. Well,
Mhm.
they need to find those plateaus and then keep climbing up. It's those are little small things, but one thing that's important for this team for the rest of the season is just that they don't fall down. And I'm not talking about points in the standings. I mean, just in the habits that they're trying to create, in the consistency that they're looking for. That's where you just don't want to falter and feel as though it's snakes and ladders, and you caught on the snake and you've gone down the hill again. Just
Mhm.
try to just keep climbing up. It's going to be like little steady gains. They might not show on the in the standings. You could argue that it would be better if it did not, but the players will know if they caught ladders instead of snakes, and if that's what they're looking for collectively.
Well, ever since Martin St. Louis mentioned that they were on the best 5 or 6 game stretch of the season when they were in the midst of a 5 game losing streak, the start of that 5 game losing streak was on February 15th. So since then, they've played 11 games. And honestly, just from a numbers point of view, it's looking pretty decent considering the caliber of teams that they've played. And so, they are what? They're seventh in the league or eighth in the league. 2, 4, 6, eighth in the league in expected goals for percentage over that span. So, and there's others where they're kind of hovering around 50% in most of the important categories. So that's for this team and where they are, that's improvement. That's moving up. And so
Yeah.
that's what Marty's talking about. And again, of course, so the players to look at it any other way other than to give it your everything over the last quarter of the season almost. I would hope so. I mean, that's really that's what you get. People are still paying money to get into the building when you're playing. You should be giving them a performance that's worthy of that ticket price. But one guy I'm looking at who could possibly use this as a catapult to next season is Josh Anderson. And he, this is the time of year when it's considered garbage time to some extent, where it's you're playing out the string or whatever, and I don't feel that's the case for Josh Anderson. And there was an interesting stat they showed. Actually, it was on the Bell Center scoreboard. This was the Canadians that put it up, and they showed who in Josh Anderson's career, which team he has collected the most hits against. First was Toronto, which was over 100. Second was like Washington or something, and it was like in the 80s. Like it was so far ahead, the Toronto one.
Yeah.
And I was watching him on Saturday night because I had a chance to talk to him on the road, as you know, and he mentioned a few things, how he's thinking so much before games, and it's never been that way before. And usually he's clear of mind because he knows what he's doing, but now he has so much information he has to process and stuff. And so I've been watching him since he said that, and he really seems to be focused on becoming kind of the old Josh Anderson that just skates around the ice and hits people and gets breakaways and stuff. The breakaways haven't come, but him finishing hits is something he acknowledged he wasn't doing enough of. Did it a few times against Toronto, wasn't spectacular, but I'm curious to see if he's able to get a reset in over these last games. And just try and salvage something from this season that's been sort of just a hellscape for him, And so,
but don't you think that it's more the summer that could enable him to do that?
Of course it is.
Yeah,
of course it is. But you can get it started now. The trade deadline's behind you. Teams are gearing up for the playoffs. The Canadians are not making the playoffs, so you need to find something to play for. If you need to find something to play for, Josh Anderson, then this is something to play for. Use these last games to show that you are not a massive problem for this team. Maybe show that you're like a minor problem or just a problem. But right now, his contract is such a monumental issue, and I feel like he still has it in him to make it less of an issue. It'll always be an issue, but if he can get back to 25 goal a year Josh Anderson or 20 to 25 goal a year Josh Anderson, it's not that bad of a contract. And so
25 goals a year, it's a great contract.
Exactly. So if you can get back to that or some facsimile of that, some version of it, let's see it. And so, every time he's spoken this year, I feel like, it was, I don't know if anyone else has done that this season. He hasn't spoken to the media a whole lot just because it's been such a tire fire all year. But I really got a sense talking to him, like this was the first time he didn't feel like under attack. when he's talking
Yeah.
to the media. Like usually when he does a media scrum, it's just one after the other after the other. What does that? What are you going to do to get out of this? And so he was able to like kind of talk naturally, and you could tell he's looking for a way to get out of this. He sincerely wants to, but he just seems a little lost. And so I
Yeah.
think just he needs a reset. I think the organization needs a reset. I think Martin St. Louis needs a reset in what he can expect Josh Anderson to do. There are a lot of people who need resets here, but I think he's someone that could be a factor next season that people have written off already that I don't think is good to write off. I don't think one bad season is not going to end his career. It could, it's possible, but it's not necessarily the case in my opinion. So I would be interested to see if we see some change in him and some actual. It's funny, Marty almost acknowledged when we asked him about Josh Anderson on that trip, the Josh is back quote. He almost
Yeah.
mentioned it because he said at one point I thought he was back, but then he wasn't, So
Yeah, it's his most infamous quote of the season. Josh is
yeah,
back.
Josh is back, and
Yeah.
it gets mentioned often on press row
Hmm.
when he makes a mistake or when he loses a puck or creates a turn or makes a turnover or whatever. But Marty kind of acknowledged that he kind of jumped the gun on that. Like it was that there was some more work to be done. But I think they just need to review how he's coached and how he's handled and what he's asked to do. And maybe that applies to other players. Maybe that applies to Brendan Gallagher, who's also been asked to kind of diversify his game in a similar way and hasn't really shown results. Even though I think there's been improvements made to his game, like just conceptually and just able to like see more of the ice than he used to, but it's not necessarily producing anything. It's not necessarily helping the team much. So maybe this is an area where Martin St. Louis can kind of look at himself and say, okay, well, maybe not every player is up for my brand of thinking, and or my brand of teaching. Like maybe less is more with some guys.
Right.
So
Well,
we'll see.
that's why I'm thinking that if Martin St. Louis needs a change of approach with Josh Anderson, I expect that he'll get that critical distance and that aerial view, that bird's eye view to analyze the whole thing more in the summer. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
the mental opportunity of the trade deadline now being passed that enables a player to really press the reset button, especially when it comes to a guy that was not really discussed in any trade rumor, a guy that that might have been afraid to be traded, and he stands pat and says, "Ah, cool, I'm still here. Now I can focus on hockey." I think that these are circumstances that are more convenient for a guy to really turn the page and align his season in a different way so to make sure that he finishes on the right note. But I'm not exactly sure that it's Josh Anderson fits in that category. To me, it looks like a guy that he's probably never going to tell us that, but I'm sure he's the sort of guy that says, "Can this season please be over, so I can move on and change my mind, start from scratch next year, and try to figure out something new with the coach." I think I am totally in agreement with you that it's not one bad season that makes him a total write off, but the beginning of the next season will be super important because if he starts the first couple of months of next
Mm-hmm.
season, if they're like this year, uh, he will start looking as though in Montreal at least he's not really salvageable in that environment. But it's too early to predict. It might just be one bad season, and something can be figured
So
out in
let
the
me
long
so
run.
let me pick up on that because I agree with you. There was no one talking about Josh Anderson being traded, which is why maybe it doesn't apply, but maybe it does for the same reason. So last year at this time, Josh Anderson was being inundated with trade rumors, right? All season there was talk of maybe Josh Anderson is going to get traded. I know for a fact that at least two teams were in talks with the Canadians about Josh Anderson prior to the trade deadline last season. This
Yeah.
season, nothing. Um, Josh Anderson didn't like those trade rumors. Um, but another side of trade rumors is that you're a sought after player. And if all of a sudden those trade rumors stop, well, what does that say? I mean, David Savard was asked about it. Like the fact that your name was out there, there is a certain pride involved when you know that teams are inquiring about you. So the other side of that coin for Josh Anderson is like, whoa, like what happened here? I didn't like those trade rumors. I didn't want to be traded, but I kind of did like
It was
them.
interesting. Yeah.
It was a side of it that was flattering, and now they're not there. So I gotta nip this in the bud. And the thing that you mentioned that I think is valid is that, maybe it's not the end of his career, but maybe it's gotten to a point where in Montreal it's not going to work. Well, you want to get out of Montreal, you got to start playing. You got to become a desirable player again. And that's why you have the last quarter of the season or whatever's left in the season now, teams still scout these games. They're not,
sure.
It's not as if NHL scouts stop scouting because the trade deadline passed. They're still scouting these games. They're still gathering information. The Canadians are still gathering information. The Canadians, I would say, don't know what to do with Josh Anderson right now. It's proven, he's been so inconsistent. He'll have one good game and then 4 bad games. He's just been a source of frustration across the board for himself. It's just been a frustrating season all around for him. So that's kind of what I meant in the sense that he can rebuild that value both internally and throughout the league over this last bit. And it's like, if he needs that boost to get him going, I would, if I were him, what are there, 18 games left in the Canadian season? I would look at it like they're playing in the playoffs. Right. 18 games is a good playoff run. So I would say, okay, starting now, we're in the playoffs, and I'm going to play like I play in the playoffs and just start hammering everything that moves and just flying all over the ice and being a menace. And I mean, that would be my approach. I don't know if that's what he's going to do, but he needs to do something. He needs to be more visible on the ice.
It would be, and it would serve everybody. It would serve the Canadians. It would serve his own, personal benefit. It would serve his trade value too. If, in the event that he would like to be, in greener pastures, although the grass is not always greener elsewhere. But, I remember the other day you and I were chatting and saying, if the Canadians were trying to, make a big splash, adding Josh Anderson to a trade, does it make any package more attractive or less attractive? Well, I think that there's a world where you add a guy like Josh Anderson and you're going to, because you're getting let's say a star forward in return. There is a world where Josh Anderson's a very interesting asset because of his size, his speed, the fact that he's been able to score goals at this level, and that when he's productive, his salary is his contract is totally palatable. But right now, he's a negative value. So at least you want to.
You're paying to add him to a package.
That's it.
Yeah.
At least you want to change that so that you reach the threshold where he becomes a positive value again, and it's considered by the acquiring team like one more asset. He's not added just to make the deal possible. If the Canadians say we give you Josh Anderson, it means something. It's worth something. So it's both responsibility to the team and to the player to make sure that he regains his value. But in the process, if that's possible, I mean, a competitive and effective Josh Anderson is a guy you want on your team too. So,
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like a best case scenario for him is that he figures it out. He gets back somewhere close to what he was before. And if that's a guy who scores in the high teens, low 20s, then so be it. And you have him on your third line. And if you have like an effective Josh Anderson on your third line and just maybe even a new hook on the other wing, like the way they played together in training camp and all the speed they had together, like you have the building blocks of a pretty darn good third line. I mean, if you can find a center there to play between them, and if you're looking past next season, maybe down the line, like that could be Owen Beck, like Owen Beck being a third line center with Newhook and Anderson on the sides, then you're in a pretty good spot, but that's if Anderson's actually doing the things that made Josh Anderson worth $5.5 million a year to begin with, which
Yeah.
was being a physical force and scoring goals and all that. So he's a big one. And Gallagher, I think Brendan Gallagher too has an opportunity to kind of salvage the season and sort of finish on a good note. Because these are easily, these are the two legacy Bergevin contracts that are the most cumbersome for the Canadians going forward. And this current administration has done a good job of cleaning a lot of those contracts out. These are the two that are left, along with Dvorak, I guess. And, it's obviously Dvorak can't do anything to salvage his season, but these two guys can do something.
Who would have thought that Yoel Armia would manage to figure things out at
Doesn't
a
that
late
give you hope
stage
for
in his
Josh
career?
Anderson? Yeah, absolutely.
So
And you know what? Yoel Armia did it by being like kind of self-aware and being and using the resources available to him to get some help with some of the mental side of the game. And I'm not talking about his mental health. I'm just talking about his mental approach to hockey.
right.
That's what Jean-François Menard is there to do. That's why I found it a little shocking that Josh Anderson had not even considered talking to that guy yet. And after the season that he's gone through, like, why wouldn't you talk to that guy? So it was strange to me, but yeah, Yoel Armia is a great example of a guy who if he just puts his head down and works, and Yoel Armia has dealt with a lot more adversity this season than Josh Anderson has, and got through it all. And it should be noted that Josh Anderson's attitude has been fine. Like there's been nothing wrong with him as a teammate or whatever. It's just he's just mired in this awful season. But yeah, if I were Josh Anderson, and I even mentioned to him, like, Yoel Armia, look at what he did. Talking, he was like, yeah, you're right. It's like, but you still haven't done it, So,
But you mentioned Josh Anderson, being a guy that could potentially be helpful in the third line. Armia's one guy. Newhook down the line maybe would not be on a more competitive version of the Canadians. He would not be needed on the top six. One more guy who'll be counted on in the future is Joshua Roy. And we've brought up and I think it's been made public since then by I can't use the fact that they're looking at sending him back to Laval. Right now, Colin White is injured. He's day-to-day. He's practiced with a non-contact jersey on Monday. So it shouldn't be too long that he comes back. When he does, the Canadians will have more flexibility and would have like two extra forwards. But you don't think that they should not even wait for White to come back. They should send him down right away, right?
I would. I think Joshua understands the situation. He spent most of the season with Laval. I understand everyone wants to play in the NHL, and I get that. But Laval's fighting for their lives right now. I mean, they want to get in. They have like kind of the fewest games remaining among the teams fighting to get into a playoff spot. They had a good weekend. Over the weekend, they swept 2 games against Cleveland, tied for top spot in the division. So that was good. They had a couple of good results kind of fall their way among the teams that they're chasing. But right now they're 3 points out of a playoff spot. Yeah. And the Marlies have 2 games in hand on them, and the Senators have 1 game in hand on them. So, there's been some separation there, but they need to get on a winning streak. And so I think that Joshua Roy has proven his point, and I think the Canadians have gathered enough information on him to feel pretty secure in the knowledge that this guy, they can count on this guy being part of the mix as soon as next season. Whether that's a third line guy, whether that's a second line guy, whether that's a fourth line guy, like he can play anywhere. He can do just about anything. He's been so responsible away from the puck. Like all the things you expect a rookie to struggle with, Joshua Roy has done very well in. And now that the confidence is there, you see him making more plays in the offensive zone. But in my eyes, like all that is great. In my eyes, Laval needs him right now. And if I were them, I would send him back because they have to start winning games. Their next game is Wednesday. If I were the Canadians, I would have him play in that game. And if they want to play him against Columbus Tuesday, fine. But I would have Joshua Roy playing in a Laval uniform as of Wednesday. That would be my call.
Perhaps they could look at the waiver wire to to compensate and just nab some guys there
Mm-hmm.
uh, to replace what, just to make sure that they have enough NHL bodies that they can use, and so that way, you could give him that opportunity. You will still want to remain competitive. You don't want to undermine what you're doing at the NHL level. But you're right in the sense that both the player management and the coaching staff is on board with that. Everybody, I think, is really in tune with what's considered the priority here.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to leave the roster in a tough spot. Either with insufficient um, opportunities or options at your disposal if there's an injured player or if you want to scratch someone. So I think that this probably could be a good idea to look just for more guys that you could add from the waiver wire just for the rest of the season. So
Yeah, so that's and so there's something else we'll be looking for between now and the end of the season, but I thought we could open our mailbag segment with that. We don't have a mailbag jingle, eh?
no.
It'd be fun if we had a mail like we do a mailbag every Monday. We should have a mailbag jingle. If anyone feels like making us a mailbag jingle, we are very interested in all jingles. Anyone
Yeah.
want to make a jingle for us for anything, mailbag, even like a show theme? Just go ahead and let's see. Let's take some applicants. All right. So again, you can submit mailbag questions or jingles to Basu and Godin at gmail.com. You can reach us on X at Basu and Godin. We're going to start with a question from Martin Turenne, or Marty Turenne, as he named it. And so his question is about David Reinbacher's potential arrival date in Laval.
Yes.
Clutton's relegation series is scheduled to begin play on March 16th, which seems like a long break after the end of the regular season. As I understand the promotion process, only teams that have applied for promotion are eligible to be promoted, and only if they also win the Swiss League. So my question is, and I'm going to explain everything else you mentioned, is the delay in scheduling Clutton's relegation series related to the fact that the series may be irrelevant if neither Visp nor Olten win the Swiss League, and if both are eliminated in the semifinals, might Cloton not have to play the relegation series at all, allowing Reinbacher to come to Laval right away? So here is the situation with David Reinbacher. So he, Marty's correct that Cloton is waiting the results of what is the second division Swiss League's semifinals to complete. There are only two teams from the Swiss League that applied for promotion to the National League, which is the top division in Switzerland. They are EHC Visp and EHC Olten. Each of them reached the league semifinals. So in order for David Reinbacher's team, Cloton, EHC Cloton, to have to play what's called a play-out series against the last place team in the National League, which is HC Ajoie, one of Olten or Visp would have had to reach the final of the Swiss League. So Visp has already been eliminated. They are out. They lost to La Chaux de Fonds. I believe they were swept, if I'm not mistaken, but they're out. Olten, on the other hand, is up 3-2 on GCK Lions, which is actually Zurich's kind of minor league team. So on March 12th, which is tomorrow, Game 6 is being held between the Lions and Olten, and Game 7 is slated for March 15th, which is what, Friday?
Yeah.
Friday. So, and then on March 16th, depending on that result, like if Olten wins one of those two games, then on March 16th, Reinbacher would have to play, or Cloton would have to play in that play-out series against Ajoie, which it should be noted, even though Cloton was the second worst team in the league in the standings, they were far ahead of Ajoie. They were kind of far and away the worst team in the league. So who knows how long, but that would be a 7-game series. So that would run potentially till the end of March. So if the Lions manage to win the next two games, then that playout series will not be played. And theoretically, Reinbacher could be here within a week from now. So it's all playing out this week, basically, to know when Reinbacher will be here.
Yeah. So, and people might wonder how come, if the Canadians if they needed to paper Joshua Roy and Jaden Struble in order to make them eligible to participate in the AHL playoffs, well, David Reinbacher was not papered, but he was loaned by the Canadians to Cloton, and because he was loaned already, he doesn't need to be papered. So he would remain eligible to the playoffs. So he could come and join Laval at any point, whether it's a week from now or in 3 weeks from now. And when he does come, he's going to play. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about other prospects that could be eligible or to come to play in Laval. I'm thinking of Adam Engstrom, for example. Adam Engstrom, right now he's in the obviously the league in Sweden, and he's got quarterfinals coming up, right? So,
well, his last game is also tomorrow. His last regular season game is tomorrow. Yeah.
So, and also he's also in a situation where he's waiting to see if there's going to participate in a playoff series that would start Thursday. But the thing is, a guy like Engstrom is a good prospect. They would like to bring him over. They would like to bring over possibly Oliver Kapanen, who's playing for Callup. Obviously, there's been talks of Lane Hudson. But Jean-François Houle understand that there's a balancing act between doing what he's going to do what he's being told, right? So with the players that there's going to be like marching orders on, well, we send you this guy, he has to play, which is going to be the case with Reinbacher. But there's also a balancing act with, I need to figure out what's my best lineup to make sure that we reach the playoffs. And also I need to make sure that the team that has fought the whole season together, all of a sudden I'm not taking out pieces to put guys that will make the whole group too disgruntled. There's part of it that's just normal. They're all professionals. They understand that there are some guys that are scratched. The higher prospects, higher in the hierarchy or in the team's priority, they're going to take their spots. It's fine, but you cannot assume that all the kids that will be coming will necessarily take the spots of guys that are currently there. So there is a balancing act. There might be, and the sooner those guys come in, let's say an Engstrom or a Reinbacher, you can give them bit by bit. Engstrom, you can play him one game here, one game there, and ultimately, if he doesn't play every game, should the Rocket make the playoffs, it's not a big deal. But all those guys, I think that there's a hope that they will be able to be brought in the fold in Laval. The only guy that will not participate in Laval will be Lane Hudson, because Lane Hudson, even if he was not to go far with BU in the NCAA playoffs in a national tournament, he will sign his entry level. I mean, he's signing his entry level after the trade deadline, and because of that, and because he would burn the first year of his entry level right away, that makes him ineligible because he was not able to be papered on time prior to.
Well, there's only one way for him to be eligible, which would be for him to sign an entry level contract that began next season, and that would mean signing a 3-year entry level contract that begins next season, as opposed to signing a 3-year entry level contract that burns this season. So basically, being on the second year, so it would basically be wasting a year towards eventual free agency and all the arbitration, all the other benchmarks that are necessary. And so that's not happening. I mean, it's just not for a player of that caliber. It's not happening. But there is a way to get Lane Hudson to Laval. That would be it. But it's just not realistic at all.
No, like they did with Jaden Struble last spring.
Yes,
Jaden
exactly.
Struble, he was older, so it was a 2-year entry level for him. But he waited. His entry levels kicked in only this season, and he signed an amateur tryout so that he could join the Rocket and perform very well over there.
So that would be the only way.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not
So
happening.
I hope so. That's what's happening exactly.
Yeah,
So
that's
thank you, Marty, for your question.
mhm.
If we and I think other people in
Other people
Metsis
did.
also some.
Taylor Cody had a question about this.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of people, so we decided to answer that one off the bat because that was our most popular question, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay, I got a question here from François Gauthier, also from the email. He says it seems the CH has been plagued all season by disorganization in their D zone, with
Hmm.
long moments of being caught in the zone, looking lost. Mistakes like Slavkovsky falling asleep in a permutation up by the blue line against Carolina, with Brady Shea scoring almost as if on a breakaway in the follow up, seem very common and costly. Same with the PK, which seems a real liability except for brief sequences. I've been wondering all season long about what exactly the D system is in the zone, but I haven't found someone to explain it and comment it. And tell me why is the the Canadians assisting on keeping this obviously flawed system instead of playing more of a zone system, which seems to me like it would be easier for a non-contending team. Could you guys explain all of this to me and probably other baffled listeners? So, well, there's a lot
Well,
to it. The first thing I would say to that is that they play a hybrid system, which means that when the other team is in the Canadians' end and the puck goes high at the blue line, and you've got two opponents at the blue line, obviously the defensemen, you'll have two Canadians forwards that will put pressure up the top, and those two guys will play zone. And then the three guys that are lower in the Canadian zone will play man to man. I think that the biggest issue, but once there's a cycle going on, and you've seen it against Florida recently, you've definitely seen it against Carolina, when the other team starts cycling and starting making switches and interchanging like this, east and west, uh, they've sure identified that it created some confusion among the Canadians. But one thing that Martin St. Louis says, because he says, we could have chosen man to man or zone. We've chosen hybrid. We're not the only team to do that. And every system's got its flaws. But he says, for us, the most important thing is that we have to remain alert. We have to remain aware. And that means for the guys, even if they're playing man to man, it means, look over your shoulder. Make sure that do you have your stick in the right position? Are you keeping sight of somebody who might all of a sudden be available because there's been some double coverage? I think that there's been a lot of occasions where guys just forgot to look around and have a read of the defensive situation and ended up being too late. One thing that's really typical of a young team is that they get caught puck watching. They're hypnotized by the puck, and because of that, they completely forget their assignment. So whether you choose to play zone or you choose to play man to man, if you're caught doing that, bad things are bound to happen.
yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. The one thing I would add is that, and to play devil's advocate and kind of speak to why Francois asked the question. And hey, shout out to Francois who's in Bern, Switzerland, I was there recently, and it's a beautiful place to be. I love that place. But well, just as we were talking about with Josh Anderson earlier,
Yeah.
sometimes taking a step back and being like, is this the best defensive system for everyone on my team? Can everyone execute this?
Yeah.
Marty doesn't like the suggestion that there's been some missed execution because of the heaviness of the system in the defensive zone. Just how on your toes you need to be mentally to know when you're switching, when you're not. I mean, just last week, I forget what game it was, but I think it was in Carolina actually, where uh, Caden Gooley was just totally frozen for a moment, and then realized that he had to have the guy by the blue line had to skate out to him, and as he was skating out, the puck worked its way back down, and his man went down, and he was just lost for like a sequence. And it's not as if Caden Gooley's not an intelligent hockey player, I mean, it's just like it happens. And a one-off doesn't mean that you have to change the whole system. But I do feel, to Francois's question and his point, um, that it has been happening
Yeah.
semi-regularly. And so when it does, I don't expect, you can't change a defensive system in the middle of the season, especially not when you're not going to the playoffs. Like, there's no reason to do it right now. But when you take a step back and take all those instances of confusion and put them together and be like, okay, well, is this too much for them? Or is this just natural of it happening the first year we institute a system like this? Will it be easier to do? But, the counter argument to that would be like, well, do we really want a system that's so hard to integrate new players into and whatever? And so I think there's some real fundamental questions that can apply to many areas of the team, not just the defensive zone coverage, that this coaching staff needs to ask itself. I think this is one of them.
Do you think that zone defense would be easier to implement and easier to understand for players?
I do.
Yeah.
I do personally. It's always the same, more or less. Like it's the fact the difficulty of the hybrid is that it adapts to what the other team is doing offensively, and I guess the zone does to some extent as well, but not to the same extent. This is definitely the bigger lift mentally of the three options as far as the defensive zone coverage scheme goes. The biggest mental lift is the hybrid, for sure. And it's, if executed properly, it's probably the most effective of the three. But executing, it's difficult when you have to think on the fly and make decisions on the fly and recognize situations. Like, I really think that this is one of the things that Josh Anderson was, I think, insinuating when he said, I spend a lot of time sitting in the dressing room before games thinking.
Yeah.
I feel like this is probably one area where he's probably thinking a lot, and so if you can eliminate some of that thinking for some guys, I think a lot of guys probably thrive when they're really mentally engaged and they're thinking a lot. And I think some guys, it's too heavy for them, so, we'll see. I could be wrong about that too. That's just my impression, is that I've seen it often enough where there was a lot of confusion in the defensive zone, where I think Francois' question has some merit, and I think the Canadiens coaching staff could maybe ask those same questions and see if they're doing the right thing. Next, we'll go to this is actually a pretty pertinent question from I don't have who wrote this question. Sorry. Oh, Laval Dufour, who's actually in the States, if I'm not mistaken. So the question was, now that Allen has been moved, what is the plan should Montembeault or Primo get injured? They bring one of the Laval goalies up as an emergency call-up. Would that move not count against one of the 4 call-ups? Will adding a more seasoned American League goalie be a priority for the offseason? In other words, are the Habs still thin on goaltenders?
Oh, they are. For sure they are thin.
The answer is yes. They just lost one, so they're thinner than they were on Thursday.
Yeah, well, it's funny because Kiswo had come back, right? And did he get injured again? Yeah, I think so. Because anyway, Strassman again was called up. But the thing is, yeah, so you're right, Robert. It would be an emergency call-up, so it would not count against the 4 regular call-ups. That's how it works. As soon as there's an injury and you are at the minimum of what that position requires, you call up a guy to fill that minimum on the roster. And so that's, 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, 2 goalies. Those are the minimums. And then so definitely would be an emergency call-up. In all likelihood, it would be Jakub Dobeš. But it speaks to the fact, I think, that the Canadiens in the offseason will need to find a third goalie. I've been on that train for quite a while, thinking that the Canadiens need to find a guy who's an experienced goalie, who is good enough to be called up and serve as a third goalie when there's an injury, so that they don't have to expose Dobeš, but also a guy that's just average enough that he can go through waivers and not be picked up. You see a guy in Edmonton, Calvin Pickard, has been doing a very good job as the third goalie. And since Jack Campbell went down, Picard replaced him, and he's been doing solid job in front of the Oilers net. But he's been on waivers many times throughout his career.
Mhm.
Changed addresses, was picked up on occasions, was not on others. But I think that maybe that this, in his particular case, next year would not be a good opportunity. But a guy of that level, let's say a guy I'm thinking of a UFA next summer, Magnus Hellberg, who's right now he's the number 3 goalie in the Florida Panthers system, if I'm not mistaken, if not number 4 goalie, with Spencer Knight being down 2. He's 33 years old. He's a guy, you have to convince a guy to say, hey, come to our organization. We're not going to
Mhm.
give you a one-way deal. You're going to be on a two-way deal, and you're going to split playing time with our goalie prospect down there. It's a tough sell. So you have to have a guy that doesn't initially have high aspirations of where he is in his career at this point. Maybe Michael Hutchinson could be a guy that would fit that bill, probably even better than Hellberg.
Mhm.
But that level of goalie, I think that it would be very nice. I mean, Kaskisuo was a nice story. People have been watching his YouTube feed and whatnot, but I think that it's now that they don't have Allen anymore, they need to find that third string goalie that would be acting as an insurance policy for them. So those are two names that I could come up with.
And not to mention, yes, you need injury insurance, but I mean, it's not impossible that Caden Primo just starts playing poorly. It's like
Yeah.
he hasn't proven himself as an NHL backup goalie yet. I think he can be one, and I think the team's going to be patient with him, but you can't discount the possibility that he's not going to become this. So, and just to clarify, Kaskisuo is actually not injured. They recalled Strauss-Mann, according to Anthony Marcotte at least, as an insurance policy, as someone who can. So it was just a call up.
Okay.
None of the goalies are injured, but still, it's the point
Perfect.
remains valid. It's because the other thing is that the Canadians have made a habit of having goalies in Laval on AHL deals, which doesn't help when one of their goalies goes down unless you give that goalie an NHL contract, which had happened with Kevin Poulin, I believe, was in that situation not that long ago. Um, so yeah, let's move on to another. Let's take one from Twitter. Daniel D'Alessandro asked, if the Habs only have one retention slot left for the next season, which they do, what is the most likely scenario they use it under? Similar to how they did with Allen this year or with another UFA, would they ever retain 50% on Gallagher or Anderson to facilitate a trade rather than buying them out? My first point on that, Daniel, would be that they don't have to use it. It's good to have, and in the situation that they found themselves in the last couple of years, it facilitated some moves that they wanted to make, but it's not you don't have to retain salary of 3 guys every year. So I think that would be my first point. My second point, I don't think they're going to retain 50% on Gallagher or Anderson in order to trade them, at least not next year. That's not coming for a while. So I think they're just they would rather just have that retention slot just sit there. I mean, there's a lot of guys that they could trade at the deadline next year that they could use it on. Armia being one of them, uh,
Dvorak.
Dvorak, Evans, it's a number of guys. And so that's a possibility. Like, who knows? I mean, Savard, obviously. So they having that retention slot for the deadline next year would probably up the value of anyone that they would look to move at the deadline. I don't think the Canadians are thinking like that right now. I think they hope to be somewhat relevant next season and that they're not necessarily doing a full-on sell-off by the deadline. How realistic that is debatable, but that's the hope. So having that retention slot, I think, is probably there in case they need to sell a player at the deadline or they want to sell a player at the deadline. They can do so using that retention slot.
Yeah, I think that obviously they won't get into next season thinking we're going to be sellers again. There's no doubt about that. But I think that if they come to the situation where they are sellers, I think that they're going to use all three retention slots. It would be better if they did not, but I think that the way the market is evolving, retention slots is not something we were discussing even 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather recent, but it's a byproduct of the so many teams being cash constrained with a rather flat cap or almost for the past few years. There's going to be a bump. There's no doubt about it. But now that teams have started using retention slots, it's like selling something at a discount. You go to the store and there's 40% off on a piece of clothing. It makes it more interesting. So if you want to have your piece of clothing more interesting than the next store, well, you're going to put it on sale. And I think that there's the way that the market has shifted now. Using those retention slots are a new way of making your assets more attractive. So, a more competitive team will probably have less retention slots used. Teams that are rebuilding might use them more, but the more quote unquote bad contracts or useless contracts you want to shed, well, you'll turn to them. And the Canadiens, so I would think that next season they could use again 3 of their retention slots, but after that, without Petrie there, without Allen there, they could clean their cupboards and basically start from scratch to a certain extent. But I'm thinking of guys like Savard, mainly Savard, Armia, and Dvorak as three candidates for that thing. So, but no, they're not going to start doing with Armia or with Anderson or Gallagher what, for example, the San Jose Sharks have decided to do with Thomas Hertl, which is to pay 17% of his salaries for 6 more years. Yeah. That's telling everybody we're going to be rebuilding forever, and we're ready for it. The Canadiens are not in that situation one bit. No.
And just to add to that, like the current trend, so coming out of the trade deadline, there are 13 teams in the NHL that don't have a single retained salary on their books, which means that there are 19 that do. Montreal is one of, I believe, 4 teams that have used all 3 of their retention slots this year. There's a number of them who have used 2, but it's 13 teams have used none. So that's really less than half the league, or well over half the league that has at least one retained salary transaction on their books. But I do agree that once the cap starts organically going up, is tied to revenue again, which is going to be the case within the next few years. We will probably see fewer of these than we do now. Okay, let's get one more in. Yeah. You got one over there?
We could...
Oh, this one's actually interesting. I like this one. So I want to hear what you have to say. This is from Andrew McGregor, who's kind of a loyal listener, often sends in questions from Calgary. He asked, because this is interesting to me. The trade deadline was widely characterized as a buyer's market. I'd like to know how front offices determine what the market is. How do they figure out what other teams are offering for a player they're interested in to avoid negotiating in a vacuum and being fleeced? Sometimes there's an early deal that sets the market for a specific type of player, but I'm always intrigued by how consistent the price paid seems to be between teams, even on a frenzy day like the deadline. So,
that's a very good question. Mm-hmm. I think, you know what? I think that teams are getting caught negotiating in a vacuum sometimes. They just don't know.
It's hard to know. It's hard to know.
It's hard to know. They might be presented in front of a situation where the other team will say, you know what, you better make up your mind quick because I've got 2 or 3 other offers. Uh-huh. Sometimes there's always bluff. It's like in poker. Sometimes you'll have a real offer that's right there, and basically the team that receives the offer will try to shop around and see if somebody else has something better to to offer, but some other times they'll try to shop something that doesn't really exist, and you want to create a market, or you want to, yeah. So or you have other situations where you're going to feel like the team was just bidding against herself. So I think that this is a skill that some general managers have in their negotiating tactics, but I don't think there's any way, certainly not from the outside, probably that after the fact, some GMs will say, oh gosh, I was fleeced on that. They will understand after the fact what really happened, perhaps. But from the outside, it's really difficult to determine when there was like through a real auction that was taking place and there was one that was fabricated to a certain extent.
Well, I think a perfect example of what you're talking about, and what the question is referring to, is the Sean Monahan situation with the Jets. I think, speaking, Kevin Cheveldayoff, when he did his kind of a Zoom call after that trade, it was hard not to get the impression that he thought maybe he maybe was negotiating in a vacuum. Like there was obviously demand for Sean Monahan, but how urgent that demand was difficult to determine. And he also referred to this whole thing as a game of poker. It really is about bluffing and trying to read a bluff and all that. And there are other ways front offices can get information, right? They have a vast network just within their own organization of people who know people and rumors circulate, information circulates. That's why we have insiders, because they tap into those sources of information. They get them out. They are those sources of information for a lot of a lot of the conversations they have with front office type of people can be transactional in a way, like they do serve as a conduit of information throughout the league. But I think the Monahan not knowing exactly how it went down, you just look at the Monahan situation. The Canadians had a price that they wanted to see. They wanted. The Jets were kind of reluctant to meet that price. Then one of the Jets' trade targets goes to Vancouver, that they were going to use their first round pick to acquire. Now all of a sudden they have this first round pick. They've already committed it to getting a center, and all of a sudden the market's changed. And so at that point, to some extent, Winnipeg could have been like, we're not giving you a first round pick. We're going to wait it out. We're going to see, and maybe we can get them cheaper. But if you do that, and who knows what Ken Hughes told them, if you do that, you risk losing the player. And the Jets were absolutely focused on this player. They wanted Sean Monahan was, after Lindholm, was their number one target on the trade market. And I think that they made the right choice. As it turns out, they overpaid for Sean Monahan because it was a buyer's market. It turned into a buyer's market closer to the deadline. But you ask Kevin Cheveldayoff today, and what he paid that first round pick for was to get an extra month of Sean Monahan, to get him acclimated to the team, to make him more playoff ready when they hit the playoffs, and they got their player. So that checks a lot of boxes. And that, to me, is worth the difference between a first and a second round pick. Like, I could have gone Sean Monahan for a second. Oh, look, such a so-and-so went for a second round pick. So-and-so, Tyler Toffoli. I got Tyler Toffoli for a second and third. Same team, for crying out loud. But I used the first on Sean Monahan. Well, if more GMs would just kind of be like, you know what, screw it. This is, when I walk into a casino, I usually say like, okay, I have $100. I'm going to take $100, and this is what I have to spend at the casino. And the longest I can stay at the casino without losing that $100, to me, is a win. It's basically like it's paying for my entertainment, So I've already committed that $100. So whether I spend it at 25-cent slot machines all night and just do that, or gamble more heavily and potentially win more, it's up to you, right? And so the Jets decide to gamble, and we're like, no, you know what? We're going to spend it. This is the player we want. We're going to spend the premium to get him now. And I think they did that in a bit of a vacuum, because there's no way they could have known how it was going to turn out a month later, or close to 2 months later, actually, or no, a month and a bit later, that all these guys would be going for far less than what they paid. But I don't think they're upset about it right now. So, But it's a good
Yeah,
question because it's hard to gauge. It's hard to gauge what the market actually is because you're dealing with people who have invested interest in being dishonest with you.
right. But there's no doubt that, just like the Elias Lindholm deal, the Chris Tanev deal was also a benchmark for the deals that came after. But there's
Hmm.
no doubt that this year it was a buyer's market. When you look at, for example, the Athletic, you guys had a trade board with like
Hmm.
15 names on it. There was a lot of offer. So then it's always supply and demand, right? So the supply was there. As for the demand, I mean, usually prices will be traditionally it's been a seller's market in years past. Maybe it's the
Hmm.
fact that teams that are buying at the deadline realize that, you know what, late additions, they don't often work. We pay a ton, and what difference did it make ultimately? Maybe they've learned lessons from the past, but the change this year that I found is that usually it's the buyers drive the price up because the big guns, the teams that say we have a real chance, we're ready to go and we're ready to pay what's needed for it because that's the player we need to get to be better. But those very, very competitive teams, the teams that would be the most aggressive on the buyer's market, right now they don't have much to sell. They don't have much to trade. They don't their prospects cupboards is a lot of those teams don't have a lot in their pipeline. They don't have a lot of cap room. They've already spent a lot of their draft capital. So if the teams that are meant to be the most aggressive don't have a lot to offer, it's hard to create an auction. So
Hmm.
for that reason, I think that there's that's one of the reasons why it turned into a buyer's market this year because the prices because there was such a big supply, the teams that wanted to get better said, you know what, this is going to be our price. We cannot go above that.
Hmm.
You look in years past, there were very few first round picks, despite the fact that everybody says that after 20, there's a drop this year in this year's draft. There was not that many first round picks that were traded. But you look in the last 3 years, Nick Foligno was traded for a first round pick. Anthony Mantha went out for a second and a fourth. 3 years ago, went for a first round pick, plus for
Hmm.
Jacob Vrana, plus for Richard Panik.
Right.
In 2022, Ampus Lindholm was traded for a first, 2 second round picks, and 2 extra defensemen, too. Tyler Toffoli was traded for a first round pick and Emil Heineman, and now he's traded for a second and a third. So
Hmm.
clearly, the prices have gone down. It might be just an anomaly, but it made for all those teams, such as the Canadians, who were trying to create some interest in guys, for example, like Tanner Pearson, who wished he had been traded and he was not. Uh, everybody had a Tanner Pearson to trade. So ultimately,
Hmm.
a lot of teams ended up with
A cheaper Tanner Pearson to trade.
yeah. So ended up, but plenty of players that were hoping to join a contender just stayed path, and much to their chagrin, and have to just end the season and find a find a
Well,
silver lining in those last 18 games.
all I know is that the Toronto Maple Leafs better knock that first round pick right out of the park. Like if they take a dud with that pick and they let Chris Tanev go to Dallas because they refused to trade that pick or didn't use that pick to get a better defenseman upgrade, uh, there's going to be some angry people in Toronto. Like it's just like that pick better turn into like that pick's going to be like probably in the early 20s. They better nail that pick
Yeah,
because a lot of people were sitting on these picks and not really realizing the value of going at it. And Toronto's got to get a cup out of this window with this core, right? This core, and you only get so many shots at it. So, I applaud Kevin Cheveldayoff kind of throwing caution to the wind and being, you know what, screw it. I don't care. This might be a mistake. It might not be. I don't care. I want that player. I have this thing. I'm going to go get that player with this thing that I have. This abstract thing that could be something. It could be nothing. It could be, the first round pick is, yes, they're valuable. And I went on a famous rant saying they're very, very valuable. But your current season also has value. You know, when you're a contending team, that should take precedent over everything else. Yes, rebuilding teams should collect late firsts as many as you can get, for sure.
Yeah.
But if you're a team in the position of the Jets this year, or the Canucks, who also spent a first to get Lindholm, or the Maple Leafs, who refused to spend that first round pick because they spent so many last year, better nail that pick. Really better nail that pick.
Well, Kevin Cheveldayoff, as much as it's true that he made that trade with Montreal for Monahan on the trails of the Lindholm trade, and there's the two are interconnected. Mm. He also avoided all the noise around trade deadline, where so many more teams start making phone calls, and there's a lot of noise that might make you lose perspective of exactly what's the target, where you go. And he was very clear-headed when he made that trade. He knew exactly he was probably the second best centerman available. He was comfortable at that time for that trade. He didn't have to second-guess himself. He said, fine, I'm comfortable with that price. I do it. And
you look at it now, and you look at a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, who had to watch Noah Hannafin go to the Vegas Golden Knights. Julien Brisebois said publicly that he has no regrets, and he thinks he improved his team at the deadline, but pretty big drop off from Noah Hannafin to Matt Dumba in terms of addressing the loss of Mikhail Sergachev. And so if they were a team that didn't have a lot of draft capital to trade because they traded every year, but there's something to be said for, even if it's a buyer's market, jumping that market to get the player you want. Yeah. And it's quite obvious the player that Tampa Bay wanted, especially after Sergachev went down, was Noah Hannafin, and they lost him. And so anyhow, great question, Andrew. It's ultimately there's no answer in there. We just said a lot of words with no answer. There's no it's impossible to say how teams can determine what the market is. It's all poker. It's all poker, and that's why the Monahan situation is theoretically, I don't know this to be the case, but just based on how it went down, is exactly your question playing out in real life. Is Kevin Cheveldayoff saying, you know what, I don't know what the market is, and I don't care, and he went out and made the deal. But I think a lot of GMs spend a lot of time trying to determine what the market is so that they don't pay more than they have to. And I think sometimes it's a big waste of time, and sometimes the deadline passes and you don't actually get what you wanted because you're doing that too much.
And one final note on that is that sometimes you may see a guy being traded and say, well, why didn't my team, make that trade? It's not necessarily a reflection of the true value of the player on the market, because there might be some teams that would have been willing to pay more for a certain player, but because of their cap situation, for example, they were just tied up and could not do it. That doesn't mean that they value the player less than what he was traded for. It's also depending on your own capacity to pay the price that's circulating. So I think that the dynamics might change next year when there's going to be a bit more money in the system and a bit more oil in the engine too. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for sending us your questions. We're going to wrap this up for now, but we're going to be back on Friday for the next edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook. Arpin, you're going to be leaving at the end of the week for Western Canada.
Yes.
So that's going to be fun. So we're going to talk obviously about that on our next episode, because it's going to be quite another hectic trip for the Canadians. In the meantime, well, enjoy the week, everybody, and enjoy yourself, Arpin.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening.